I have a very great honor today to introduce the person on the program who has the longest title. This is Congressman, Ambassador, Secretary, Governor Bill Richardson. I'm very happy that I had the opportunity to work directly for Ambassador Bill Richardson when he came to New York in January of '97. And I remember very well that the first time I got to write a memo for him and take notes for him for this brand new ambassador was an evening meeting we had with the brand new Prime Minister of Israel, Bibi Netanyahu. And one day I'll release those notes. So what I learned from Bill Richardson in the rather short time I worked for him, but in following his career ever after, as he met with such desirables as Mobutu Sese Seko or Kim Jong-il, is that straight talk will get you a long way, whether you're talking to voters or diplomats or dictators or your own employees. And we asked him here today for some straight talk about the situation with North Korea. And after he's done, he'll sit down with another fine friend, Carol Morello of the Washington Post, for a conversation about North Korea. Governor, it's your turn.
I noticed that Tom Countryman didn't mention my very brief presidential run. Joe Biden was in the race too, and frequently I see him and he's always commenting on my weight or my hair, unruly. And I said, Joe, in Iowa, I beat you in Iowa. And he says, but I'm vice president. Anyway, I want to just thank the Arms Control Association and Daryl and Carol and all of you. This is a very sophisticated audience, so I'm going to try to be very, hopefully, factual, straight talk. Tom Countryman, I remember a young guy. He was the chief political officer. All the women were after him. He was a substantive political guy on the Security Council, and he was enormously effective, and he's had a great career, but I hadn't seen him since. I also want to introduce Mickey Bergman, who runs my foundation, the Richardson Center, and he's one of the last people besides the CIA director to be in North Korea. So, Mickey Bergman. I want to just put out some absolutes as much as I know, because the situation in North Korea, the summit, is so fluid. So many things are happening every tweet, every 5 minutes, every day. And I was talking to Carol about this. The pace is dizzying, but here's what the take that I have, and I'm only going to go for about 10 minutes, and then Carol and I will have a dialogue and maybe some questions from you. One, the summit, President Trump, I was going to say Kim Dae-jung. I remember Kim Dae-jung, sunshine policy. And one of the first things I want to say is that enormous credit needs to go to the government of South Korea for this summit, for President Moon, for I think a mood. I know President Trump takes a lot of credit. I told Daryl I wasn't going to be very partisan, and I won't, because the only Democrats here are myself and that guy in the kitchen. No, I'm kidding. But I'd like to say that is one very strong reason why these developments are so positive. President Moon, the Olympics, soft power. I remember the days China, ping pong diplomacy. That's absolute number one. Number two, the summit. The president meeting with the North Korean leader. Good, important, impressive, but with a lot of risks. And if the summit doesn't succeed, the problem is going to be not a return to the status quo where there was enormous tension, but probably worse. Now, my concern is that we, the United States, be prepared, that the president be prepared. I worry sometimes that he's not very prepared. The North Koreans, I've negotiated with them, I've been there 8 times. They're disciplined, they're prepared, they are very inflexible, they are unpredictable, they're very formal. When you negotiate with them, as you know, many policymakers here, they have their talking points, they vent, they're hostile, they want you to listen to them, to show respect, then you respond back, and then maybe you make a deal with them on a detainee, on an issue relating to food, on the sidelines. It's always informal. They never make it at the negotiating table. But the idea of North Korea negotiating, their idea is not a quid pro quo. For us, quid pro quo, compromise. With the North Koreans, they feel that they have the divine right, the cult of personality, the father, Kim Il-sung, Kim Jong-il, the leader today, that what they say is sacrosanct. Their idea of a concession is they'll wait a few months till you arrive to their position. That's their idea of a concession. And the danger with this summit is that somehow denuclearization means different things to both countries. And that is the danger. That is the danger. The worry that I have, to some here in DC, the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula makes Kim handing over his missile systems, his nuclear weapons, allowing inspections to check that the regime is keeping its word. To the North Koreans, it means mutual steps to get rid of nuclear weapons, including making sure, requiring the U.S. to take down the nuclear umbrella with South Korea and Japan. The danger of this summit is unrealistic expectations. They are not going to hand the keys to their kingdom. I believe, nonetheless, when it was announced, and I got denounced by some of my Democratic friends, I thought the president was taking a gamble, but it was the correct gamble. I had looked at the Korean Peninsula the last few years. Things couldn't be worse. Missiles, nuclear weapons pointing at South Korea, artillery, conventional weapons. So I felt it was a risk worth taking. But now we need to be prepared, and I think the signs are good. I am for this summit. I am for this meeting that the CIA director had with the North Korean leader. The CIA is back. They came in, no one detected Pompeo. This is like the old Nixon days when he went. I see Congressman Slattery, we served in Congress together, but if we all recall, Henry Kissinger went to Beijing. Nobody knew he was there from Pakistan. I don't know how Pompeo got there, but that's good. The CIA is doing things right again. So I want to not go much longer except to say this. It seems that there's a new channel between the United States and North Korea. It's the intelligence channel. It's not the State Department. I regret that. I'm a big State Department diplomat person. The New York channel has served a good purpose with the Otto Warmbier case, the detainees, but it seems at the higher level, the intel people are the ones with Pompeo that have been talking about the summit, about human rights issues. So that's a change. What else from this summit that I see? One, Kim Jong-un is in charge. I don't know if he has a nuclear negotiator. We were working on North Korea. There was a guy named Kim Dae-gwan, very, very strong guy. He was a nuclear person. Kim Jong-il deferred to him. With Kim Jong-un, he's the guy, it seems. I think having this meeting with Pompeo has paved the way for, I believe, a positive summit. Everybody here understands politics. President Trump has invested an awful lot in this summit. So has Kim Jong-un. the summit has to produce some results. I think what we need to do is have the expectations manageable. I'll conclude with what I think are some of the realistic expectations. One, the return of the three Americans. I think that'll be a deliverable that would happen at the summit. Two, possibly something that's a very important cause for me, the remains of our soldiers from the Korean War. I brought 7 remains back as an envoy for President Bush in 2007. There are a lot of families out there that want to see these remains come home. Hopefully some South Korean, North Korean family reunification, human rights movements that are doable, and I hope that happens. Then on the nuclear side, I think we've got to set up a process of negotiation that I saw a timeline of 2020. I think that may be a bit unrealistic, but some kind of a process that involves a freeze, a curtailing of nuclear weapons, of missiles. The North Koreans are going to want some kind of end of the armistice or an end of the armistice. They want to have sanctions reduced, lifted. I think sanctions have been working. And I give credit to China. You know, everybody says, oh, China's not serious. I think they're serious this time. I don't know why. We have a lot of China experts here, but I think they have been serious. I will also conclude with something that I am not sure of. I think Kim Jong-un has an end game. I don't know what it is. I think he is a rational actor that has been underestimated. I mean, I worry about the gulag, the human rights violations, the starving people. But I think in the end, he wants something of acceptability in the international community. And he always wanted, whenever I went to North Korea, they'd say, we want to negotiate with you, with the United States. We're the big guys in the region. I'd say, well, what about China? You know, what about South? Well, no, we're the major powers. They got that. That's why it's so important for this summit to succeed. Anyway, Daryl, have I gone too long? That means yes, right? Okay. All right. Thank you all very much.
Governor, thank you very much. So much has happened recently, it's kind of hard to know where to begin. But let me ask a little bit about what has changed. Kim met with Mike Pompeo over Easter. Pompeo only a year ago was sort of hinting at regime change. Now the South Koreans are saying that the North Koreans are willing to accept a U.S. military presence on the peninsula, sort of contrary to all their public statements before. It seems like a remarkable turnaround, so on both parts, really. So I wanted to ask you, given how far advanced the North Korean weapons program is, what has changed that this all would be happening now? You know, is it showing that the combination of hard-hitting sanctions and bellicose rhetoric was effective? Did that play a role? Why is this all happening now instead of a couple of years ago?
The first thing, Carol, that I want to just state about North Korea is you got to be very, very careful on what they mean when they say something. In other words, the details. I saw this report that says that the U.S. can keep a military presence of some kind. Well, what does that mean? Like military exercises, troops? I mean, there's always some flexibility that they've thrown out. They're very good at PR. I mean, they're very volatile, but you have to question exactly what they mean. So what has changed? Well, you know, I mentioned before, I think the sanctions have been working. They have been working because I think it's 90% of all commerce goes into North Korea through China. And I think China has been enforcing the border. You know, when you cut and restrict coal and oil and foodstuffs and fish and North Korean workers that bring money in from China to North Korea, I think the sanctions have been biting. Again, Kim Jong-un, what does he care the most about? Staying in power, like any politician. You stay in power. He doesn't want to get knocked off. And he worries that somebody will try to knock him off, his regime, his family. He's siege mentality that I think he has. So that has changed. But then my last point is China, I think, has been moving in the right direction on the sanctions because they don't want a nuclear South Korea or a nuclear Japan, which has been threatened because of the intensive activity of North Korea's missile activities. And I will close with another issue, and that is that I think in the end, Kim Jong-un is not like his father. With his father, and his people, you could make a deal. Okay, you're going to release this American? I want an American president to come and take him out. Jimmy Carter came. Bill Clinton came. James Clapper. And if it's a very low-level situation, Bill Richardson will go. And I got a couple out that way. But Kim Jong-un, I don't think is a deal maker, a rug merchant type. I think there's something out there that he wants, an end game, and I don't know what it is totally. It could be a Marshall Plan. He may ask for a Marshall. You think that was expensive? Eventually, in a deal, he might ask for just an end of sanctions, the armistice. He'll ask for a promise, a security promise. I don't know. I'm rambling.
Well, it seemed like only yesterday he was being characterized as an evil lunatic. And now we get the impression that they are being eminently reasonable, at least in their talks with the South Koreans. Do you get a sense there's a point where the rubber meets the road and there is going to be something they will ask for that the United States will be totally unable to give?
It's very possible. I think this summit of the South Koreans and the North Koreans is going to be very important because the South Koreans will be able to gauge what the North Koreans really want because of their enormous cultural ties and their proximity and their ability to sniff out what is the real agenda here. So this is why I know that our people, and I'm not an insider with Trump, don't think I am, but I have talked to the White House people, the administration. I talk to the North Koreans more than I do the Trump administration. The North Korea, the channel in New York on humanitarian issues. I'm not into the, on remains, on what Mickey does with the detainees. So I believe, Carol, that summit is going to give us a very strong indication. And the only worry is, I love the South Koreans, but sometimes they're a little optimistic about results. And I want them to, and Tom Countryman had a very valuable trip to South Korea recently. You might want to ask him his impressions. But I just think that unrealistic expectations of what both sides are going to do is my biggest worry. And then I'm going to say something nice about the president. I think the risk that he's taking is the correct one, but I worry with his tweets. I worry with his, flying off the handle, seat of the pants. In a way, Pompeo has reassured me with this visit that maybe there'll be structure. I don't know where they're going to meet. I'm betting, let me tell you what I'm betting on two sides, me, and I know nothing. One, I'm betting on Geneva. All right, that's one. The second bet is one of the Russian islands, because Kim Jong-un doesn't take airplanes. He goes on this big rail truck. I've seen a big rail car. And it may end up in Russia, one of those little islands there. Actually, that's Mickey's idea.
Well, you mentioned you were concerned about preparations for the summit, how President Trump would have to prepare. What should the national security team at the White House be doing to prepare him for this? Really, should they, and is there a chance that we will see the 3 American detainees released before? he sits down?
I don't think they'll be released before. I think they'll be released at the summit. You know, the National Security Council, I've dealt with them on this issue. They had a very good guy as deputy who I was working with, talking to anyway, named General Ricky Waddell. I read somewhere that they fired him. I don't know if that's the case. Ricky, I read it. I didn't say this, but he was very competent. They've got a guy named Pottinger there that seems to know what he's doing. And the young woman that spoke to you, is she still here? Okay. So at the State Department is that worries me, and Countryman knows this. You know, I love the State Department, but our diplomats were depleted when Tillerson was there. We have no ambassador to South Korea. By the way, Victor Shah would have been really good, really good. That guy knows everything, and you know, he's Korean ancestry and knows diplomacy, nuclear stuff. I don't know what happened. But the NSC has to be the coordinator. It's always been that, Carol, but this may be different with Pompeo. What I hope Pompeo does is he goes to state and relies on diplomats and not on his spies that he brings from CIA. Nothing wrong with being a spy, but my hope is that he gets respected and brings the State Department, our diplomats back, because they're very demoralized right now.
You know, you mentioned that you are a little concerned that if these talks fail, it will be worse. So I wanted to ask you, given that last night President Trump said he hopes they will be fruitful or he's just going to cancel them or walk away, what would fruitful look like and what would worse look like?
All right, what does fruitful look like? One, get the detainees back. Two, get some remains back. Three, a ban on chemical weapons to Syria. Three, nuclear and missile export bans or freezes. That's very important. On the missile side, verification so that there's a freeze on their technology so Americans don't worry about a missile coming into the mainland, some way that we can reassure the Guams, Alaskas, that they're going to be okay. On the nuclear side, you know, DIA says they have 60 nuclear weapons. They've said it publicly. I always thought they had about 20. Are they going to curb their use? I hope so. Limit their use, freeze, end them, destroy them? I don't think so. But so those are the achievables. The negative is for the president to throw a tantrum and leave, and nothing's done. I don't think that will happen. A lot is riding on the success of this summit for the president, for the Russia reason, domestic reasons, the investigation stuff. It's got to be a success. And people have said to me also, I know John Bolton, he was ambassador to the UN like I was. And they said, oh no, we're really worried. I mean, Bolton's gonna, he wants to bomb them. I said, relax. Bolton has to ensure as National Security Council, his first job is that this summit be a success. As a staff member, he can't inject, this has to be a success. And there's something about Pompeo that is intriguing. I've never met him. I never met him. That is intriguing. I mean, if he was first in his class as West Point, he's a Tea Party guy. I don't like that at all. But, there's something intriguing. I love this penetration into North Korea, this summit thing. It's like the old days, Carol, Kissinger and going into...
Yeah, I remember those. Unfortunately. President Moon said this morning that the North Koreans are basically seeking an end to hostile policies and guarantees of security. How do you think U.S. policy on North Korea should evolve, and what does it mean to guarantee security to one of the, if not the most repressive governments mankind has ever known?
Well, they've always wanted, the North Koreans, an end, the 1953 armistice. We're technically, they feel we're still at war. And so they want an end to that. They want a document But what is also important to them there is part of that armistice involves our troops in South Korea. So I think there's some room there where there can be some flight. I don't want our troops to leave South Korea. That shouldn't happen. But maybe, exercises, maybe some kind of military realignment that protects both sides, protects South Korea. We've got 30,000 troops there. I want our troops protected. I want the 25 million South Koreans in the Seoul area protected. So, and in Japan too. I mean, Japan, we've got 50,000 troops. I mean, Abe came to Mar-a-Lago because several reasons. One, he was mad about the steel tariffs. Two, he feels that the South Koreans have made him not look too good. South Korea did this deal with the summit. They kind of felt that they were outside this Japan, but they're a great ally. And I'm a free trader. I don't, I'm for the TPP. Now the president wants to get back in, but then I was doing a TV show. Now he says, no, he doesn't want to go in. I mean, like every day is something different. That's my worry on this summit, that the president somehow is going to say something like, oh, I'm going to walk out of the summit if it isn't good. This is after Pompeo is received by Kim Jong-un. I mean, if I'm Kim Jong-un, I'm saying, well, wait a minute, I thought things are going good. He wants to pull out before we start. Things like that. Asians, North Koreans, they want to save face. It's very important. You got to be careful.
You didn't really go into China. What kind of role will China and President Xi play?
Look, I've been one of those in the past that have said, oh, Chinese sanctions, they're not serious. They don't want to do it. They like the turmoil that North Korea causes us. But when North Korea started shooting those missiles so incessantly, and South Korea and Japan started talking about maybe going nuclear, I think that changed China's mind. And maybe the president's pressure on China has helped. I mean, I'll give him credit for that. So I think, Carol, the sanctions, I was at the UN. They're very carefully constructed at the UN. They involve foodstuffs. They involve oil exports. They involve coal. They involve, North Korean workers, the hackers. Maybe that's a way we stop the hackers from in China from North Korea, so they don't hack our movies and many other things. So I think China can play an important role. Will China be the site of the summit? I don't think so, but it's possible. The six-party talks, bring him back. I'm not sure about Russia. I don't know if I would trust Russia to be part of the regime that enforces not just the sanctions, but the verification. I don't know. Russia's up to a lot of no good stuff, and it concerns me because they're a very important country.
You gave a pretty vivid description of what it's like negotiating with the North Koreans as one of the few Americans who's ever had that experience. I mean, how do you get around the hostility and the, how is that different than dealing with other countries, other adversaries, and is the United States prepared to deal with the kinds of traps that may present?
Well, I've negotiated with the North Koreans, with the Taliban, with Saddam Hussein on prisoners, with Sudan, Bashir. President Clinton once, he was asked at a press conference, well, why do you send Richardson to do some of these things? And Clinton said, well, bad people like him. So, countryman, you remember he said that? He said that. I said, you could have said it a little differently. But yeah, they differ. Carol, it's like negotiating with inflexibility, with diplomats, politicians that feel they're being driven by a deity, by Kim Jong-un, by the father, by destiny. Most North Koreans don't leave the country. They get programmed television that tells them America's terrible. They have the Pueblo incident, that happened, I don't know, 100 years ago. They show it every night as a defeat of America. They have these beautiful, they're called in Mexico telenovelas of, flowery North Korean love and romance, and then the deity, the leader. They're programmed, and so they don't see the way we Westerners quid pro quos. They don't see that. So you have to find ways to influence them. When I was involved my first time in North Korea with bringing back 2 American pilots, one that perished, they're very sensitive to bad press. They're very sensitive to, they follow every news item of getting bad press, keeping, doing detainees. This is why I get involved with political prisoners, hostages, and the families say, should we publicize that we want American pressure to bring our kids back? I say, yeah, do it, because it works. Most diplomats disagree with me, but I think that's important.
What do you think this summit should lead up to? What kind of framework do you see? You mentioned 2020. You seem to be thinking at least 2 years of talks. Maybe even that's optimistic. But what kind of framework should be established to work through the nitty-gritty details?
A framework led by the U.S. State Department. What does that mean? Secretary of State, if he gets confirmed. I think he will be confirmed, especially with this trip, and, if I were in the Senate, I would vote for him, because I think we need leadership right now at this very critical juncture with North Korea. What kind of framework? A negotiating process I think it has to be at a high level, led by the Secretary of State, not a special envoy. One that involves South Korea, one that involves China, one that involves Japan. I'm not sure about Russia, but a framework that leads to more talks, a process, and set a timeline. And maybe you don't make that timeline. I think 2020, is a little too soon. I noticed that I think coincides with the election, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
So, but here, I want the president to succeed. I want our country to succeed in this summit, but I have my worries. But the framework, what I don't want is okay, the president walks out because he says they're not going to denuclearize like this afternoon. Well, they're not going to do that. But I think the Pompeos, the experts at the State Department, we should name an ambassador to South Korea like tomorrow. We should bring Victor Cha back or send countrymen there. But we need that. We need that anchor. We need that anchor right now. So, Carol, one other thing. I always felt, how in dictatorships, the military is considered to the left, to the right of the leader. They're the ones that are the hardliners. I think the North Korean military, they are more positive towards negotiations than you think. When we dealt with them on remains, they were flexible. Of course, they'd get foreign exchange for the remains, but I think that is an unused, that maybe our military leadership should be part of the negotiating team to talk to the North Korean leadership. Their military, and I think who calls the shots? Kim Jong-un, through his security people, not military, not like guards, but he's got a security apparatus that seems to have been security intelligence apparatus. It seems to have been the channel with Pompeo and our intelligence people that have been talking to the North Koreans about this summit and many other issues.
In the past, agreements have fallen apart over the issues of verification. Do you have any sense of what kind of verification regime could be come up with, that they could come up with that would be acceptable enough to the United States to feel we're monitoring it, yet not so intrusive that the North Koreans wouldn't accept it? Is that realistic to think that we can even trust them?
The North Koreans are going to cheat. You know, they cheated in the '94 agreement, the framework. They enriched uranium after 8 years, although I say it was worth the agreement because for 8 years they didn't have nuclear weapons. They started cheating, and they did. They did it with Pakistan, and they brought technology in. You got to watch them. And one of the problems with that agreed framework is it didn't have strong verification. There was verification on the Yongbyon facility, but they've got other sites where they have a lot of this activity. So I think it's got to be IAEA inspectors. They're really good. As tough as they have on the Iran agreement. The verification on the Iran agreement by the IAEA is well done. And Iran has been complying. By the way, I think it'd be a mistake if we got out of the Iran deal, as much as Iran is obnoxiously acting on Yemen, on Syria, on American prisoners, on terrorism. I think the North Koreans are going to notice that. And the timing, I think we have to decide. Slattery, when do we have to decide? May 6th or May 12th?
May 12th.
May 12th, you know. The summit thing, early June, maybe the president, what I would do if the president, I think he has the ability to delay it for 4 months. You know, this is a typical politician ploy. We like to delay. I would urge the president to delay for 4 months. This could not be a deal breaker, but it could be. I mean, if I'm the North Koreans and I say, well, President Obama signed this and now a new president takes it off. What if they do this with an agreement we have with the US? I mean, so I don't see the logic there, but I hope we retain it or postpone the nuclear. It will affect North Korean thinking, in my view.
You keep in touch with the North Koreans, so what are you hearing from them on what their expectations are of this?
Well, you know, I think they're, my sense, and maybe I'll have Mickey say something. We saw them not too long ago. I think they're excited about this. I'm talking about the only people I talk to are in New York, Carol. I mean, we don't let them travel anywhere, the UN mission. I think there's a positive sense. They always wanted to deal with us, with the United States. Even when I was in government, they would always agree to see me in New York. You know, you'd have to almost always buy them a steak, but, you know, we did that. It's supposed to be funny. I guess not. They don't like countrymen. They don't like to pay for anything, do they? Hey, you want a cup of coffee? Oh, I forgot my wallet. No, they don't even say that. Okay.
You seem to be suggesting that this is part of a long, long plan that the North Koreans have had, that it's not just taking advantage of circumstances, but they've almost been plotting this scenario out for a while, do you think?
You know, Carol, yesterday I came here I'm a member of a board called the World Resources Environmental Board, you know, and I know we've got a lot of very important people here, diplomats, journalists, business leaders, and they were talking about 5-year strategic plan for the world resources. I'm not big on strategic plans because, you know, I got to deal, when I was in government and politics, a crisis every week. And I liked President Bush, George, when he said the vision thing. Well, you know, the strategic plan, things change. So did Kim Jong-un have a strategic plan? I don't think so. I think what happened is this, in my view. One, he's achieved almost all he wants technologically on the missiles and nuclear, almost all. So you negotiate when you have your strongest leverage. Number two, I think he genuinely is afraid of being knocked off. Look what he did to his brother, who was, I think, being groomed by the Chinese and others to take over. You know, he's petrified of losing power. This is what dictators do. And then thirdly, you know, if you look at the North Korean budget, most of the money has been gone into the military. Maybe he wants something to happen with his economy. And that's where he looks to the West, easing of sanctions, loans, you know, the agreed framework. We proceeded with nuclear reactors, with food. Maybe there's a grant. So is it planned? No. And again, I'm going to give credit to South Korea. You guys in South Korea jump-started the process through the Olympics and then the summit of your own, and then the summit that you paved the way for the United States to have for North Korea. Because I knew it wasn't our grand plan for this meeting to happen. You know, if I know I interviewed with some South Korean journalists earlier, my hat's off to South Korea.
Well, thank you. I think there may be some questions out in the audience.
Raise your hand and.
Is that all right?
That was great.
Bullshit.
Thank you very much. Benjamin Tour, retired State Department official. You referred to the increased nuclear capability of North Korea, and actually Kim Jong-un has said explicitly that they've achieved their goals and they've gone as far as they need to. So in terms of what has changed, certainly this increased capability, which poses a considerable threat to us, is one thing that changed, but even more importantly is what has changed on the U.S. side. Realizing the threat and the danger, our position has changed, and we're now engaging in a serious negotiation, including on the end of the armistice and so on, which could lead to a significant agreement in the interests of the U.S., an agreement that if a Democrat had negotiated it, he would have been shouted down as a traitor, or as perhaps negotiating one of the worst treaties possible. Thank you. Please comment.
Well, I'm glad the State Department has a very strong spokesman here. And look, I don't disagree with you. By the way, we have a great arms control negotiator here, Mr. Weiler, Jacob Weiler. He negotiated with John Quincy Adams. No, I'm kidding. No, I asked him. It was Eisenhower. It was Eisenhower. I mean, you know, I hope we can get the North Koreans to, I know the Arms Control Association, to sign the NPT. Sign it, but then, you know, observe it. That's the worry. Look, about the only area that I might disagree with your point is, there's no question their missiles can probably hit continental United States. The issue is, can they do it with a nuclear warhead? I'm not sure that they're there yet, but they're very close. Do you agree? Yeah. So, but still, you know, what is that, a year away? I believe right now, North Korea felt, because of the push from South Korea, the events, you know, President Trump likes to take credit. Oh, it's because I called him, you know, a little rocket man, and we put pressure on him, and fire and fury. No, I think there was a concerted agenda from the North Korean. The South Koreans pushed the process. And I think the president is looking, like any president, at dramatic legacy achievements. That's the way this president is. And that's also a worry that you know, he's going to fly off the handle and get mad. And, you know, just that's a serious worry that I have. I want some real diplomacy there. And maybe Pompeo can do this. I don't know. If somebody knows Pompeo, I'd certainly welcome a perspective on, you know, he seems to be very smart. And I commend him for getting over there, and the CIA, probably an unmarked plane, and with his trench coat, and that's good.
Well, I'll hold it, Carol. So, one in the back. Ask a question, and then we'll take this one over.
I have two questions, but they're short. My name is Heather Timmons, and I'm from Courts. What happens if Pompeo isn't confirmed, is my first question. Does it matter? And secondly, you talked about Abe being sidelined before the Mar-a-Lago visit. It seems like the Pompeo trip really overshadowed anything Abe was doing there. We keep jokingly calling it the Mar-a-Lago surprise. You show up thinking you're going to talk about one thing, and then something else happens. How important is it to get Japan's help, cooperation? Do we need to be doing something else there? Thank you.
Okay, I will answer, but where are you? Where did you speak from? Oh, I thought I'm either going blind and deaf. Okay, so Japan I believe Japan felt slighted because most of the action was South Korea, and Abe didn't know about the summit, and et cetera, et cetera. The steel and aluminum tariffs, timing-wise, you're a politician. You want to take care of your politics. He didn't like that, especially since he and the president seemed to have a very warm personal relationship. Japan is key. It's probably our top ally, along with South Korea in Asia, our friend. So I think this visit to Mar-a-Lago was good. Did Pompeo's overshadow? I don't think so. I mean, Pompeo's visit was in the Easter. I think the president got confused. Maybe he said it just happened last week. Well, Easter was some time ago. So I think the politics, the foreign policy, South Korea's gotten a lot of credit. The South Koreans have consulted with us. There's positive movement. I think Japan's this visit has been good for the United States, good for Japan. Overshadow, no. This trip, I'm going to tell you again, I think was necessary, positive. It sets a framework for discussion. It sets possibly an agenda. The leaders communicate, get to trust each other. My hope is that the summit of the president and the North Korean just establish some trust to develop a process that might lead to denuclearization. I've voiced my doubts, but that's what it's all about. And I'm going to you're going to have another question? One more question, yeah. Oh, okay.
Galen Carey with the National Association of Evangelicals. You mentioned in passing the gulags, and so I guess my question is, if there's some kind of progress on the security front, does that make it more or less likely that the human rights situation would improve? Because for many of us, we're grateful that we're not going to be bombed, perhaps, but we're also deeply concerned about people that are locked away in prison.
Yeah, I mean, that has to be our priority. And I worry that this administration has not given human rights the priority it deserves in the Middle East, across the world, Duterte, gosh, in Philippines. I'm not going to get into countries, but so I would like to see, as part of an agreement, maybe phase 2 of an agreement. I think the first one has to be nuclear and some of these humanitarian issues, like the prisoners and the remains and the family reunification. But phase 2 of the dialogue should be human rights and the gulag, and maybe in return. The North Koreans are going to ask for something. I'm telling you, not just military issues. I think they're going to ask, I think if you think the Marshall Plan was big in those days, I don't remember it, I'm not that old, that they're going to ask for something. But yes, I think, if you look at most of the people imprisoned by North Korea, they're evangelicals, Americans. And that should end. I mean, there should be some visiting human rights agreements that involve people. And, maybe your movement, your church can be very much a part of that.
Wonderful. Governor Richardson, thank you very much. Carol Morello from the Washington Post, we really appreciate your coming with us to help lead this conversation with the
Thank you
governor.
for having me.
Please join me in thanking Governor Richardson for his insights.